We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us on News Channel 5 Plus, and we're streaming live right now on newschannel5.com on Facebook if you want to send us a message. A lot of the messages coming on here right now, and Pat Nolan, our political analyst, is with us, are, unlike some of the calls, which is fine, going to different questions, addressing the issue of education. And most people here seem to express some concern with the state of public education in the state of Tennessee and want to see it improve, and that's exactly what they're going to talk about tonight.
I think it's been improving, but obviously there's a long way to go, particularly I think in the K-12 area. One of the things we've had a problem with is to try to quantify and test how well the students are doing. We've had 2 or 3 different kinds of testing things that are done. There have been problems with getting the test sent out online, even problems getting it sent out and have enough pencils and papers and things that they need to actually take the test and do it. So that's going to be an issue that this governor is already trying to address, but will probably have to be addressed by the new administration. How are we going to find out if what we're doing works? Because we keep having these tests that are being taken, and every year they get back too late to be able to be counted into the final scores for some of these kids. These tests are important because
they sure are.
They're part, in some cases, it's a part of getting graduating.
Yeah.
And so that's been a problem, and they've had several different kinds of problems every year. And I know the legislature wants to continue to look at that quite a bit, so we'll see what they wind up doing with it. They'll probably be talking about it in some of their committees this year. I don't know that there'll be any major changes between now and the election, but therefore it'll probably still be on the governor's desk when the new one gets there.
Let's go to Reverend Fuzz. Good morning, Reverend Fuzz.
Hey, man.
Hey.
Good morning, Pat. I'm going to use your advice now. Great statement I heard yesterday. I meet with a lawmaker, talk to one almost every day. And he said, if you don't like the law, change it. If you don't like the lawmaker, change the lawmaker. But here in Tennessee, Pat, how does it look? How did the Republican Party become the party of Tennessee? There was a time Tennessee, before there were red and blue states, Tennessee was a blue state, all over the state. And now it appears that Tennessee is real red, not just red. I mean, it's bloodshot red. And how did that come about? And does a Democrat governor have a chance in Tennessee even this year, even with what's going on in Washington? There's a big favor of President Trump in Tennessee. So how does it look? Thank you.
Thanks, Reverend.
Well, I think that's one of the situations we're going to have to continue to monitor throughout the year. I mean, I said earlier that I think the Republican nominee, whoever that person winds up being, is probably going to be the favorite going into the fall. I mean, this has been such a red state. He's correct. Some of those changes from Tennessee being a blue state to being a red state date as far back as the changes with the civil rights legislation that was passed in Washington back in the late 60s. Even Lyndon Johnson, who was president at the time, said, well, probably a good bit of the South is going to become more and more Republican. Now that's happened. It's kind of gone back and forth in Tennessee. It didn't quite go Republican real quickly after those civil rights bills were passed. But particularly in the most recent years, I mean, they quite frankly, they've had a lot of better candidates in some cases for this. And they have controlled. I mean, just to go back to the U.S. Senate, there has not been a Democrat win a U.S. Senate race in Tennessee since Al Gore won in 1990. There has not been a senator that was a Democrat from Tennessee since 1995 when the Republicans took over both seats in the 94 election. So and like I said, they've gone back and forth every 8 years between the two parties in the governor's seat, but that's all the statewide races we have. The only other barometer would be how are we doing in the legislature, and the Republican supermajority I think it's been at least 3 legislatures have had at least, and not just a majority, a supermajority. They've had in some cases more than 2/3. In fact, for the last several legislatures, the Democrats didn't even have to show up because the Republicans had more than a quorum. Not just a majority, but a quorum. They could operate by themselves if all the Democrats decided not to show up. They could do whatever they wanted to do. Now, so therefore, a lot of the things that have been going on in the legislature have been, are the Republicans together on this? Because if they are, they can legislate anything they want to. But when they're not, and a lot of times they've been divided up on issues, nothing has gotten done.
Yeah, even within their own party, sometimes there's different opinions there.
So I think it'll probably stay more Republican down in the legislature for one reason. the districts they all run in there, both the state and the House and the Senate, were drawn to be favorable to the Republicans, as much as the Democrats drew theirs to be favorable to them. So that will be an advantage for them going. And now whether the majority gets narrowed a little bit, I think that's a possibility. But a lot of it will be what kind of backwash we get from what's going on nationally. If indeed it becomes a Democratic wave nationally, that they take back over the House of Representatives nationally, they have a chance to take over the Senate, although they got a lot of seats on the Democratic side to defend. They may be able to have some kind of impact of that down in Tennessee. Will the Senate race and the governor's race help the two Democrats together? Will that also help the Republicans hold on to those two seats? It's a little early to tell about that yet, but certainly one of the themes to look for the rest of the year.
Let's go next to Grady. Good morning, Grady.
Good morning,
Hey.
Nick and Pat. You know, our politicians have changed. We used to have a Bible-toting Franklin or Buford Ellington. Either one of them could have been evangelistic, you know. Or a red shirt, a checkered shirt, or a red pickup truck walking across the state. You know, this women's movement, I think, is going to have more impression on the governor's race than anything else we got, because they're out registering voters, they're gathering people together, and it's going to be a woman's era, I think, for the governor and for the state of Tennessee. And, you know, these people that think that Trump is a mark to follow, you know, I mean, all the things that come out about his sexual life, you know, and I'll hang up and listen to y'all's comment.
All right.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we have the potential in November to elect the first woman to ever serve as governor of the state of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Diane Black's in that race, along with Beth Harwell on the governor's side. They're both Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Republican side, we also have Marsha Blackburn, who would be the first Tennessean,
She'd be the
first woman senator from Tennessee.
Interesting.
Interesting, they're all Republican candidates. And you would think, given the way the women's movement has generally been portrayed nationally, that you see Democrats that would be women that would be running. At this point, not for any of the statewide races this time.
Yeah, the women are Republicans in Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, I mean at least in terms of the candidates.
That's what I mean. Yeah, in these races.
How it would break out here in terms of what the vote would be.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I would think it might trend slightly Democratic, but maybe not by the margin.
Well, you saw the huge turnout this past weekend just here in Nashville, and you look at that, and you know what partisanship is there, and you know they weren't all Democrats, I'm sure, and they weren't all Republicans.
Well, of course, Nashville is a little blue enclave in the middle of all that.
So but I think they came from all around, perhaps.
Well, I think they did, and I think there were probably some marches in some other parts of the state. I have not heard as much about what the turnout was in Memphis or Knoxville or Chattanooga, wherever else. I know there was another one in Knoxville. I saw some video of it on Facebook.
That's right. Well, let's go next to William. Hi, William.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Good morning. I have a question about criminal justice reform and education and health care. You know, these candidates, they promise too much to get people vote. And then when they get in office, the people that fund their campaign, corporation, they put money away. And then when they get in office, you know, they pay the company. And then the normal people like me is still in the same place. There is nothing changing. And then, you know, I'm a victim of a criminal justice system. You know, my job was taken away from me for something I did not do. Even though if I did it, and I went to jail and I came out, which I did not go. And after that, you know.
Okay. Well, we can't get into too many details on his specific situation, but I'm glad he brought up criminal justice, which, by the way, is not going to be part of tonight's forum. But, I mean, I wonder if the governors at some point are going to have to address the issue of juvenile justice reform to some degree, because, gosh, especially here in terms of crime and punishment and the juvies committing homicides and shootings that happen here in Nashville, it's out of control.
Well, I don't know exactly what it will be, but I do understand the governor is going to be backing a proposal that would address the area of juvenile justice reform. Now, exactly what it's going to do, I don't know. Again, I suspect if it's part of his legislative package, he'll spend some time talking about it in the State of the State, but exactly what that's going to be, I don't know. What's interesting about the whole area of criminal justice reform, it's one of those few areas so far that seems to show indications, at least on the national level, that you've got a lot of support from the left wing of politics in the country, but some right wing too. It's almost like they meet a little bit there. Now, they don't always necessarily agree on the same tactics and things to do, but the fact that that's an issue they both think needs to be debated and something needs to be done about is interesting, because they don't agree about that on a lot of issues.
Right.
One side says, yeah, we need to do a lot of stuff. The other says, no, we really don't. In this case, you really do. Now, how it's going to be and how it's going to work out in Tennessee, I do know there's something going on in terms of juvenile justice, at least being talked about this session. Now, what's going to happen with the adult system, I don't know. I think there's obviously issues there, and the caller seemed to relate to something that was more in the adult issue for him, although it could have happened when he was a teen as well. But I think that's an issue to continue to watch. I think that's going to be an issue we're going to be talking about more and more as we move forward with our justice system, because a lot more people think it's broken and needs to be fixed.
Right, and the symptoms all around that. And yesterday the governor was announcing his plan to fight opioids more.
Yes,
that keeps.
And I think that'll be. I mean, I think that it's interesting that he announced that yesterday. Normally, the most impactful thing they sort of hold back for the speech itself. The fact that he did that yesterday is an indication that this is so important, and particularly when he had both the Supreme Court Chief Justice there, and he had a lot of legislators in there, because they've been involved in it too. I mean, I think that this is a session so far up on the Hill that doesn't seem to have a particular overriding issue, say like the gas tax was, and the other things doing for mass transit that were in the last session. This may become the big issue, and you see some questions coming up. Well, we're going to limit the amount of opioids that patients can get, and that may include cancer patients. I already hear some doctors saying, well, I can't, giving them 5 days worth of opioids isn't going to work for that, so I'm going to make an exception for that. Is $25 to $30 million going to be enough to address this issue? Because the goal is to end the opioid problem in Tennessee.
Right.
And I'm sure most of that's going to be state money, because the feds have talked about it, but so far the feds are not putting any major money behind it.
That's a huge undertaking. Listen, we need to take a break on that. When we come back, I'm going to hit some of these comments that we've gotten from folks on Facebook that are following us right now at newschannel5.com, and we take a few more questions for Pat Nolan, as we're kind of talking about the fact that we will be co-sponsoring a gubernatorial forum tonight over at Belmont. Pat will be a part of our coverage as well then. So we'll be back with our final segment right after this.